destined to be a lawyer?
Apparently so. I guess it was my calling.
How so? What'd your dad do for a living?
My father was a pastor, a church pastor, and I am the only one in my family, the first one, I guess I should say, who went to college. And I started out as a psychology major thinking I would like to be a psychologist, but I didn't care for the Psychology 101. I knew that it wasn't the area that really sparked my spark. I had a good friend by the name of Sheila DiTullio, who is currently the Erie County Family Court judge, has been for a number of years. But she was there at Houghton College with me, and of course she had wanted to be a lawyer from the time she was 2 years old. She encouraged me to go into pre-law, and that's what happened.
So, by way of background, your dad was a minister. Was he at a certain congregation?
Actually, he started out in the Baptist congregation, but he up in Niagara Falls, where we lived for a while.
Is that where you're from?
Always Western New York. I was actually born in Gowanda. My father served in various churches around Western New York. But when he was in Niagara Falls, he was asked to, he worked for a while as the assistant manager at the city mission in Niagara Falls, but he would be asked to fill in pulpits, and he was asked to fill in a Church of God pulpit in Niagara Falls. And from there, he was asked to candidate for the church in Bustye, and he ended up accepting that, and that's where he was until he died.
So that's then you following that path, you sort of ended up in this area.
Right.
Where did you live?
So, we lived in the Parsonage on Southwestern Drive in Bustye, and then after he died, he had built a little house for his retirement on Creek Road in Bustye, in the town of Bustye. My mom still lives there. She's 96 years old.
Wonderful. That's great. So there you are. Was it any question you were going to go to Houghton?
Actually, no. I wanted to go to Hope College in Michigan, and my father wisely counseled me to try a couple of different colleges, and we visited Houghton, and they were so friendly and kind, and of course with Dad's encouragement I stayed a little closer to home.
So aside from home, it was also more of a religious-based college.
Yes, although it is my understanding that Hope College does have a religious base, but I never pursued it. I never did find out. So
you go to Houghton, you meet your good friend DiTullio, and she inspires you, and then you took the LSAT?
Yes, took the. I actually, as a Houghton outreach, there was a singing group called Sun Touched, S-O-N, Son of God. And we traveled around the country during the summer and during our breaks singing. And we would stay in people's homes, or we would stay at Christian camps and do our music. And I took the LSAT on the road. I had to sign up for it in Albany, and one of the people that allowed us to stay in their home actually drove me to the law school in Albany to take the exam, and then she drove me to catch up with the rest of the group after the exam. So
now, you are very musical. Is that right from the beginning? Was your mom and dad musically inclined?
Yes. So it's a good gift.
Well, not only singing, but piano, organ too?
Yes, a little, not much. It's a different instrument actually, but.
So you find yourself taking the LSATs, getting a good score. How did you decide what law school to go to?
Again, in getting a little advice from friends, I applied to 3 law schools. I applied to Cornell, on which I got waitlisted. I applied to Harvard. I worked as an intern for Congressman Stan Lundeen. I had the opportunity during my senior year of college to work in his office as a, it was a American Studies program it was called, and we studied down in Washington. And one of his aides there in the office said, "Hope, apply to Harvard." She said they like to have all kinds of backgrounds, and you coming from a big family and a pastor's family, you might just stand out. Well, I didn't. I got rejected from Harvard, and then of course I did apply to Dickinson.
Yeah.
So
when you went to Dickinson, for the camera, so did I. What was your impression of Carlisle?
loved it, absolutely loved it. In fact, if I wouldn't have had family here, I could have seen myself settling there. I just loved that little community. I used to walk. I lived in the home of an elderly woman, rented from her, and walked probably 3/4 of a mile to the school and back. And I just loved it. People were friendly, and it didn't have harsh winters. So it was really a nice little community.
Do you remember your professors your first year?
I do remember the contracts professor, who was very, very scary.
Kelly.
Yes, Professor Kelly. Oh, and you just would sit in fear and trembling if he was going to call on you. Very intimidating. So.
Yeah. Yep, I can confirm on the camera.
And I remember Professor, the torts professor, I think it was Prosser?
Well, that was the horn book with Prosser on torts.
Okay.
He pretended to be the same guy, Frankson.
Frankson, yes,
Arthur
yes.
Frankson. Right?
Yeah, yes.
Round guy, and likewise fearful, but nothing like, if you ever watch, for folks watching this, turn on the paper chase. That's Mr. Kelly. He didn't have a pencil, and he had a chart, and he'd go, the next one I like Mr., and then he'd pause. And you could hear the people sweating.
Everyone in expectation. And then he couldn't pronounce my name. My maiden name is de Blasi, so he had trouble with that. And so when I would see him struggling to pronounce the name, I knew it was going to be me. D-B-A-C.
Property, was Dodd still there?
Yes, I had Professor Dodd, and we actually had a woman attorney for constitutional law who I think was new in my freshman year. I think it was Professor Kellett.
Yeah,
and she was just,
Kellett.
just a lovely lady, a great teacher. I enjoyed her class.
It brings back memories. You only stayed there a year, right?
Yes, I started into my second year, and then my father passed away from a brain tumor. I still get choked up, isn't it, something, all these years. So it would have been a little bit financially difficult for me to continue on. So I thought I'd come home, work a little bit, get a little bit farther ahead, and then I would be able to go back again.
You did something most lawyers never do. And talk about that.
Well, when I got back to New York, I found out that under New York law, you could successfully complete 1 year of law school, and then you would be able to clerk for a minimum of 3 years, and by doing so, earn the right to take the bar exam. And so, thankfully, I had a law firm that was willing to take me on, and that's what I did.
Who was that?
It was Lombardo, Selstrom, and Burgett. Mr. Lombardo was, I think, about 84 years old at the time, still came into the office every day, brilliant person. And then, of course, John Selstrom and Dalton Burgett, and at that time, Chuck Hall was associate, and Dale Robbins. So they were wonderful for giving me training experiences. And
had they done that before with anybody else?
No, and I think that Dale Robbins probably was instrumental, because he had known my dad. My dad had helped in different areas in the town of Busta and also in Chautauqua County. So I think Dale was, based on my dad, he was probably willing to give me a chance.
So what did they have you do?
Well, some of it was grunt work, like putting pocket parts when the pocket parts would come in for the law books. And I did do legal research. I would report to them on different issues. I actually would meet with clients sometimes with them, and maybe do some of the simpler drafting and things.
Pause for a second, because you dropped a bunch of names there. Talk a little bit about Mike Lombardo. I mean,
Well, of course, he was famous because he'd had some famous criminal defense cases, and he was very short, probably as short as I am. I do remember one day, we were on the 6th floor in the Hotel Jamestown, and I do remember one day that I don't know if I was going up or down, but I know I was in a hurry, and that elevator just seemed like it was stopping at every floor. So I kept pushing the button to close the elevator door and get going. And sure enough, I started to close the door, and Mr. Lombardo was trying to get on. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we kind of chuckled. He said, "Don't ask for a raise today," he says, because I practically shut him in the door. But yes, he was a very kind man, always very polite, always dressed so professionally, and he wasn't there long after I came.
Did he ever take you to city court? That's when our paths would cross. He would occasionally show up. Of course, everybody deferred to him. Mm-hmm. Did he ever have you drag along?
No, I can't say that he did. So.
Did he ever tell war stories?
Not really. Like I said, he wasn't there long after I got there. Now, the other attorneys and I used to go, we would go over to, I think it was Nellie's Deli in the Commons. Do you remember that?
I do.
And we'd always go for coffee, and we'd sit, and they would talk about cases and things like that. So I do remember that was interesting, but I can't say I got any war stories from Mr. Lombardo.
John Selstrom?
Wonderful person. Yeah. So grateful for him. Of course, his concentration was mainly estate planning, mm-hmm. and I know that he handled some very large estates, and again, he gave me the opportunity to be involved in that and learn the ropes in terms of the taxes and the filings. So.
And then Dalton did a lot of litigation.
Yes. And again, it wasn't long after I had been hired that firm split. And Burgett and Robbins went one way. Of course, Mr. Lombardo retired. And then Selstrom and Hall were together, and I stayed with them. And then Mr. Hall did eventually go on his own.
So when you got your 2 years, was it 2 years?
Three years. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What happens then? Do you have to make application to even be able to sit for the bar?
Yes, yep. And of course, I took the cram course that you take.
But just to even let you get in the door, because you didn't have a bar degree,
right.
A law degree. Mm-hmm. Is it an application signed by John Selstrom?
Yes, he had to verify that I had the appropriate clerkship, and then of course I had to get the transcripts from Dickinson and Houghton. But it didn't. I don't remember it being a difficult process. It seemed to me that it went fairly smoothly.
And you got your invite to take the bar, and you took the bar prep course?
Yes.
Did you do it online, or did you travel to Buffalo?
I traveled to Buffalo. Actually stayed up there with an aunt of mine that lived up there. Yeah. So it was tough.
Did you feel, I mean, you didn't go the normal route, mm-hmm. for better or worse, but mm-hmm. was that, you were intimidated by that?
I think I was intimidated, but honest and truly, I think for me, that was probably the best way to go. Prior to that, of course, I had no office experience. I didn't have anybody in my family that was an attorney or anything like an attorney. And so I think having that experience and actually having the opportunity to draw up a contract or draw up a will was absolutely essential for me. So I think that probably contributed a lot more to my chances of passing the bar exam.
So when you get done, 2 days for those that are not lawyers, it's a 2-day bar exam and you're wasted.
So true.
How did you feel?
Oh, well, I remember that the second day on the way home, it was raining so hard that you could not, you had your wipers on the very fastest speed and you still couldn't see it. And I do remember pulling over. I think it was just a whole, the nervousness from the bar exam and the weather, and it just was grueling. You
remember how you found out your results?
That was a good story. There was another gal working in Mr. Selstrom's office at the time, and we had both taken it at the same time. And I don't know how she found out, but somehow she found out that the results were in the mail. So I was just, a pile of nerves, and so John Selstrom said, why don't you go ahead and go home and see if you can get your mail? Well, the mail wasn't there when I got home, so I actually chased down the mailman. He gave me the letter. Then I was afraid to open it, but it was a pass. So I give thanks to the Lord.
What a it's a great story. In our day, Dale Robbins and myself, you knew about it because it was printed in the New York Times.
Wow.
It was insane because you didn't know when it was going to be published. So during the end of November, 1st of December, you were buying the Times, hoping
that your name was there.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. Crazy. So now you pass. You come, great news. John's got to be happy. Did you decide you were going to kind of stay with him?
Yes. Yeah. I think we worked well together, and I guess I'm seasoned there at this point, having been there now for 4 years. So, yes, and that worked out very well.
Did you, now that you're past the bar, that with that comes opportunity to go to court?
Yes.
How did John introduce you to that concept?
I would say John kind of threw me into the water to sink or swim. Which again, that's a very effective way to learn, but that was his method, yeah. It was to just go ahead and, okay, there you go, Hope. And I did a couple of trials. I'm not a trial attorney, but I did a couple of trials and, certainly got my feet wet that way.
So, did he mentor you, or was it really trial by fire?
I think it would be fair to say it was a little bit of both. He certainly did mentor. He would discuss the cases with me and give me his recommendations and input, but he really did let me have a pretty long, what's the term? Long leash, I guess you would say. So,
including interviewing the witnesses and prep and all that stuff?
Yes. Yeah. So,
do you remember your first trial?
I think my first trial was Judge Adams calling me and saying that I was to be appointed to represent an indigent defendant. There was a conflict of interest in the public defender's office, so he was picking me to represent the defendant. And I do remember calling him and saying, Judge Adams, I don't do criminal law. We don't have a criminal law manual in our office. And he said, Hope, all of the attorneys will be involved in criminal defense. I will see you on Monday. So I did go, and Paul Andrews tells this story to everyone about me. Yeah. And when we started the trial, I said to the jury, this is my first criminal defense case. I'm not a criminal defense attorney. I'm very nervous. And Paul said that won the case for me. Actually, we didn't win the case. My defendant did get convicted.
Well, you were honest about it.
But we won sympathy, let's put it that way.
Exactly. That's good. That's a good start. Because that's intimidating. And Judge Adams can be intimidating. Did you have other incidents with Judge Adams?
That was actually the only time. He did not appoint me after that. So, of course, in all honesty, he probably wasn't on the bench that much longer after that. I'm not sure exactly when he retired, but.
So you're with John, and who else was in the office at that time?
At that time, I think Chuck may have still been there when I first passed the bar. And then the other gal, Carolyn Birmingham.
Okay.
And so she was with us for maybe another year or so. She actually lived in New England somewhere, but had a home in Chautauqua. And I think that she and John had become good friends through their association in Chautauqua Institution. And so he hired her, but she moved on to other things.
You didn't set him?
Yeah, it was only about a year.
Okay.
It wasn't very long.
When did Paul Johnson become part of your world?
That wouldn't have been too long after that either. And again, he didn't stay a long time. I think he was with the firm for a couple of years. And then he took a job working for a legal publishing company.
Well, shortly before I called you, I interviewed him. And he talked about you. And I said, oh, fantastic. So, yeah, watch the interview. You'll find out the whole story of Paul Johnson.
He's great. Great guy. Very nice guy.
So you're was there a division of labor within the office? So there was you for a short, basically you and John and variously Paul or somebody else, but just the two of you.
Yes, yes. Well, and of course he was gone quite often, with his property interests and so on. John did need to spend quite a bit of time out of the office, and so probably I would have done a lot of the day-to-day things, always the real estate closings and the probate filings and those kinds of things. He concentrated a lot on the estate planning, and of course he had many large estate clients. So
what about the domestic relations stuff? Did you guys do family law work?
we did. Again, I do remember filing divorces and things. It's been so many years. I'm not a litigation attorney, so we would do primarily the uncontested, get the separation agreements in place and then go ahead and file the divorces.
The old no fault.
Right.
Here, sign a document, don't do anything for a year.
Right. I don't even know if that's still out there. I haven't had a matrimonial case in 25 years, so.
Having just said what I just said, I can't believe I remembered that 1 year rule.
Right.
Anyways, so that's something. Did you go to family court at all? Did Judge Harley pull you in as part of their guardian ad litem?
Yes, I did the. At that time, it was called. What was it called? It's attorney for the child now, but law guardian.
Yeah.
So yes, I did have a good number of those cases.
But just by assignment, or?
By assignment. I really only once I went on my own, which has been 25 years, believe it or not. I didn't take so many, and then I think they dropped me off their list. I haven't had one of those cases in a long time. We
had to go through a licensing or certification process.
Yes. And I just stopped certifying at some point. So
you're with John, and at some point you decided to go on your own?
Well, this is another interesting story. When my husband and I got married, we were looking for a home. He loves to hunt, so we looked for property with some substantial acreage so that he could enjoy his hunting. And we looked all over. I mean, we went as far as Steenburg, we looked in Asheville, we looked in Frewsburg, we looked all over. But the home that we finally found was an old fixer-upper farmhouse with 113 acres in Sinclairville. And I don't think the paper had hardly dried on the deed when I got a call from the town board in the town of Charlotte that they were looking for a town attorney. And their town attorney for many years had been Howard Crosley, and he had indicated that he would like to be able to move on. And so, being the very inexperienced person that I was, I said yes. So, being town attorney, I was often talking to folks in that area. Strangely enough, most of our clients were not from the Sinclairville area, but Bob Seidel, had been the attorney there in Sinclairville for years, since the late 50s. His wife had recently passed away. She had served as his secretary, and he actually contacted me and asked if I would be interested in buying his practice. So I talked to John Selstrom about it. I said, do you want to do a a satellite office in Sinclairville, and we thought it might be worth a try. So we actually did that. I would spend 1 or 2 days a week out there at the office, and then, of course, still be based in Jamestown. But during that period of time, Steve Selstrom came into the office, and it just began to be apparent that that was a nice succession plan for John, and that trying to go back and forth between 2 offices and always have the right files at the right time was a little bit difficult. My kids were young at the time. They were going to school out there. I'd have to race to get home to meet their school bus. So the door just opened.
Wow.
To go ahead and go on my own, and not out of any, the Selstroms and I have always been on very good terms, and John really gave me his blessing to do that. So no controversy, no animosity, just
what a great serendipity.
opportunity. Yeah.
Wow. So tell me about Bob Seidel.
Oh, such a kind person. Of course, most of his law practice was working in the DA's office, but he did maintain a part-time private practice and did wills and real estate. I think he did closings for, I believe it was Farm Credit. Maybe it was USDA, I'm not sure. But so he had many wonderful farm clients, and but it was devastating for him when he lost his wife. And he did end up moving to Florida after he retired and sold the practice to me. Moved to Florida, met a lovely lady after a period of time, and remarried. And then I think he died around 2004.
Good.
So
was he there long enough to kind of help you transition, or did he?
No. He had already,
Closed the office?
Yeah, there was very little left of his private practice by the time I took over.
Of course, the other icon, you mentioned him in that area, was Howard. Was he active at all when you started?
I knew Howard. I mean, I definitely even had some real estate transactions with him, and thought he was a terrific attorney. But no, we had, as far as the practice there in Sinclairville or the town attorney work, no, not any kind of interactions at all.
For those who are listening, Howard Crosley was a extraordinary individual, great attorney, but a character. I mean, everybody, when we will go through in just a second a composite, hope, and just to see if any memories come floating back. But Howard Crosley memories come back like a tsunami. So, and he had a big Iroquois Indian on his property, which for those, again, it's not my interview, but the Conti building, which was a beer building, which if you were traveling across Washington Street, on top of the building was this huge Indian. And somehow they had to move the Indian, whatever. And he just took it to his place in Sinclairville.
What's interesting about that is his home, where that Indian was, it sits right here on the main thoroughfare, which is Thornton Road.
Yeah.
And then my road bears off to the right. So I would have had to go past that Indian every time I went home, except that Howard had already moved.
Yeah,
he had already, at least moved the Indian. I'm not sure if he had moved at that point, but.
Is that the same Indian that's on the throughway?
It is my understanding, yes. My husband believes it's the same Indian, so it's made its rounds.
Can't help but smile. So you became the squire of Sinclairville.
Yes.
But as I looked at the composite earlier today, there weren't a lot of women at the time in the Jamestown Bar Association.
That's true.
Did you feel that at all?
You know, it never occurred to me that put me at any kind of a disadvantage. I have always felt as though the attorneys in Jamestown have just given the kindest, what do I say, is deference the right word? Just have been always accepting and kind, helpful. Never felt that I was a minority or that in any way I was being looked down upon or discriminated against. And I think some of that has to do with the lovely ladies who basically worked here before I came into the scene, which would be Judy, Claire, and your wife, Cindy, Bev Ungerer, and there were a few others that came in just before me that really set such a beautiful example and were very noteworthy.
Yeah. You're by your lonesome.
Yes.
Did you have some attorneys that you reach out to and say, hey, I got a question, an issue? Because sometimes talking to yourself, you just start going in circles.
True. Well, I know Chuck Hall had been helpful if I had a question relating to tax, because with his dual, he's an attorney, but he's also a CPA. He could often answer gift tax questions or things like that. There was an attorney at Johnson, Peterson, Tiener, and Anderson, and it was Charlie.
Beckstrom? Phillips. Charlie Phillips.
Charlie Phillips was such a lovely person, and he would often answer real estate questions and things. Such a gentle, beautiful person. I think back on, having I did even a foreclosure case, and he just was wonderful to give me advice. So, yes.
He often used the term of, all right, Greg, let's talk about the nuts and bolts of this. Nuts and bolts.
Yes, yeah, really great. So.
Charlie, so 25 years, how did were the community thankful that there was an attorney in Sinclairville, that you took over Bob's location?
I would say yes, probably the board and the village board and so on. We're glad to have the business there. But again, it's funny that most of my clientele is not from Sinclairville. Having worked in Jamestown at the Sellstrom firm, you are working with people from all over the area. So. Mm-hmm. I think at first some of my clients that maybe were from Ripley or or Brockton or whatever the case may be wondered about being there, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere. But I am in the heart of Chautauqua County, so no matter which way you come from, it's only about a 20-minute, and we have plenty of parking free. So, so I guess the reaction was okay.
Did you have to kind of adapt your practice from? Here you're again, one person, limited staff. You didn't have the full range. Mm-hmm. So how did you accomplish that?
Well, it wasn't too difficult. When I started 25 years ago, believe it or not, things were not computerized. So it wasn't that difficult to adapt from the way that we had been doing them at the firm to a single person firm. But obviously over that 25 years, things have changed immensely, and with the computerization, which I fought tooth and nail, I haven't loved it. I guess maybe that's made it a little bit easier because you can communicate through email. Because I wasn't in Jamestown, it wasn't that easy to just walk from office to deliver things or have discussions and so on. The banking has been really difficult. That's the hard part, is the banking, because anytime you have to do a bank deposit, you've got to drive to Jamestown or Dunkirk.
I hadn't thought about that, yeah.
Yeah.
There's not anything nearby, is it?
We have Community Bank in Cassadaga, which is where my trust account is, but other than that, it's about a 14-mile run to do banking. So,
library. When you're in a Jamestown firm, and they all had libraries, hard libraries, and all of a sudden you're by yourself and have to make a decision.
Yes, and I did do the library for a long, long time. I did finally discontinue it, but yes, I put those pocket parts in for probably 18 years.
So what did you have, McKinney's?
The McKinney's Laws. Bob Seidel had the encyclopedias. I kept those up for a little while, not forever. I had some good estate planning manuals a few things like that. So I did not keep the case law. Bob had shelves and shelves of the old case reports, but
Yeah.
I didn't have room for those.
Well, in your practice, it didn't, if you're not doing
Right.
litigation,
Yeah,
not as much use.
right, that's true. So
Did you ever think about bringing somebody on?
I don't have a very large office. There's not a lot of space. Recently, a gal from the area here had gone to law school and was taking the bar exam, and we did talk about possibly consolidating. She did share office space with me for a little while, but it was pretty tough. It's a pretty small space. So we'd have to really add on to the office if we were going to make it more of a multiple attorney office. So
25 years of not only private practice in the heart of Chautauqua County, and at the same time occasionally being dragged into family court. Do you have an incident or two, kind of a, Greg, you're not going to believe this, but, maybe with a client and maybe with something in court, aside from the funny story you had told at the beginning?
mm-hmm. I guess I can't think of any. I mean, you certainly always have your colorful, interesting clients, and sometimes I have those colorful, interesting clients that keep repeating. But I guess I can't really think of anything out of the ordinary.
Did you get dragged into town courts? I mean, late night courts?
No, didn't do that. Only once in a while, if it might be a family member, maybe my daughter's boyfriend, or so. But no, haven't had to do the town courts.
Who was the town judge in your area?
We've had Judge Jeff Crosley for a long time. Before him, it was Bob Newton. And did you ever do any? Oh, he was a character.
Yeah.
Just a great guy. Very, very, a farmer by trade. And just would come to our board meetings, our town board meetings, when I was the town attorney, and would give his court report and have us all in stitches. He was just, the way that he would word things was tremendously funny. So,
of course, in Clairville, you have to go through the village in order to find yourself to Cockaigne.
yes.
Is that part of your world?
It is, because my son-in-law works for Cockaigne now, and my husband has actually been doing some electrical work for them as part of he's an electrician, so they're in our world.
Was that a place where you took your kids? I mean, was that just...
Yes, my kids had ski school there, and so we found ourselves there just about every Friday night during the years that they were in school.
Mine too.
Right.
Schools was everything. So I'm going to give to you the composite of which you are in.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, Lucian Ledestro was always fun to have a real estate transaction with. And I don't remember what the circumstances were, but I do remember that I must have gotten him some type of paperwork or something that he needed, and he told me he was going to give me a great big kiss. So he was great. Gosh, it's sad to see that so many have passed away or moved on. I remember sometimes if I would deliver documents to Park Catchpole's office, he would always have a story or two to tell. He'd have you sit and he'd take your papers and then he'd tell you a story or two.
This was at the hotel?
Yes, that's right.
Who else was at the hotel at that? There were a lot of attorneys at the time.
Oh, yes. I remember Jim Westman was, I think, right down the hall from us. Mm-hmm. Or maybe he was a floor below us, but he was in the building. Spoto, am I right about that?
Yep,
Yes, they were there.
He was right on the mezzanine.
In the mezzanine, that's right.
He was Slater.
Spoto and Slater, that's right.
I suspect you may have heard Doug occasionally on your top.
Well, we had a lot of transactions with Doug. Trying to think who else was in the office there.
Stan Weeks?
That's correct, yes, yeah. The Weeks were there. But now, were they associated with Jim Westman at one point?
I think so. There was Weeks, Warren Erickson,
Yes.
Westman, and I think Westman's mother worked for either Erickson or Weeks. There's just sort of a succession planning going on there.
Yes, yes.
Weeks left files to Warren, and they were all kind of Republicans, and sort of a cabal there.
Yeah, that is right.
Do you have much dealings with the Wrights, the brothers, either Bill, Bob, or Bud?
Yes, and I know probably the only, I've had only a few trials, and one of the few trials that actually went through an entire trial, Steve Wright was on the other side of it, and of course he's wonderful. He's just a perfect gentleman, and doesn't act like an opponent. He's just wonderful. We did win that case, and I just remember him being very gracious, especially given the fact that I'm not a litigation attorney, and I'm sure he was very patient with me when I wasn't asking my who, what, where, and when questions, leading the witness and so on. But I think, who else was in our building was the Purleys.
Yes.
Reynolds and Willard Purley.
Did you have, at a certain time, a coffee break where attorneys from various offices would meet?
Yes. Well, no, it would always be just the attorneys in our office.
Okay.
And like I mentioned, we would go over to Nellie's Deli and have, if it was summertime, we'd have iced tea, and if it was wintertime, we'd
You'd be walking
have coffee.
from there?
Yes,
across the street?
right down the
Yeah.
hill from our Fourth and Pine building is where we were located.
Okay, I forgot. Yeah,
Yes,
that's where you were. Yeah.
But I was jealous of the hearing the stories of some of the attorneys that came before that would talk about having these 2-hour lunches and just discuss law. I think that would be an awesome thing to do. I wish we did that. I wish we had tea time, and really would. I think that that's the best way to build your intellectual capacities, is to be able to bounce things off of other attorneys. Being a solo practitioner, I would say that's probably the one thing that I miss. Not that I ever had it. How do I want to put it? That I think that would be a tremendous opportunity.
Well, you miss that collegiality. The reality is you see them and you talk at Lissandro's, Gandy's, used to be, people would hang out and just talk. And I don't know if you ever went to Lissandro's when Spoto and Slater would have their conversations.
You could hear them all over.
Oh my gosh. And then that was pure blood sport. They loved it.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Oh, they loved it. I mean, they were best of friends. They got it. This, Hope, if you were to, while you're kind of reflecting a little bit on some of the other attorneys, just if you had to give advice to young attorneys, now that you're sort of winding down your practice, what might it be?
I would say go for it. I have loved having my little private practice. I love being in a small town. I walk to the post office, which is half a block away. It takes you 20 minutes because you run into everybody you know, and everybody's got a question to ask. And it's really a great way to enjoy making a living. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. I don't regret 1 minute of going on my own. Obviously, I missed the Silstroms. They were wonderful to work with, but I don't regret it for a minute. And I would encourage young people to consider the idea of private practice.
Given the route you took, the only other person I know in the area who took that route was Lanny. Did you confer with him at all? Lanny Sheffield, by the way, for the camera.
Yes, I'm not sure that I remember talking to Mark Barger, and I think Mark was contemplating going that way. But didn't Kristen Lee Yao do the clerkship? Am I wrong about that?
I hadn't thought about that. I don't know. But you might be right, now that you mention it.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm not sure that I am right, but yes, I remember talking to Mark Barger about that, and he was very encouraging towards the clerkship. So.
Well, I can tell you on behalf of the bar, those people are so impressed with you generally, but the route you got to where you got to is the most remarkable. Is you just did it. You just that takes a lot of guts and inner drive, you know.
Well, thank you, but I do want to make sure that I give credit where credit is due. If it wouldn't have been for the Sellstrom office being willing to give me that opportunity, then, you know, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So I'm very grateful.
How important was it for you? You've been involved in the community, churches, singing, variety of things. How important was that for your own kind of mental stability?
Well, I think you have to have avenues other than work to keep your life sane. I mean, you could work 80 hours a week easily. But for me, of course, my family, I had my little girls, and well, they're all grown up now. Now they have kids, but I think you really have to struggle to keep the right priorities and the right perspective. And for me, I felt like my family had to come first, and then the law practice, and then the community obligations. So, and it's worked just fine. It's worked just fine.
Yeah, it has. You've impacted an awful lot of people. So.
Thank you.
So you knew you were coming in today. Is there a question I should have asked you that I haven't?
No, you've covered you've helped me think of things I haven't thought about in a long time. So.
Well, this has been fun. Thank you, Hope.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah.